This episode is dedicated to the memories of Bev's Aunt Margie and my dad Charlie. Two people who I'm sure just loved this movie. But it's the first time we're recording an episode since at least since my dad died. Okay, on to the sponsorship here. There are many types of people in the world. Some go on fox hunts. Some would never do that. Some patiently wait with a beverage as long as it takes while a rich guy sits on top of a horse and ignores the guy providing the drink. I'm not sure I have the patience to be that guy, but I know what could very well be the ideal sipper to offer to the horseman. It's coffee. In fact, it's spark plug coffee. That was probably tea in the movie, wasn't it? The English in their tea. Sparkplug is the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans in Canada. And if you happen to be a Canadian or an American, you will get what you pay for within a week. That dog won't, though. And we Canadians get free shipping. And what will get shipped is something from their menu of many blends and roasts. They even offer a rotation of seasonal blends. And perhaps this goes without saying, but you can choose half calf or decaf. What coffee place wouldn't have half calf or decaf at this point in 2023? Now here's an easy choice. Be a member of Sparkplug's Autopilot Coffee Club. Being in that group allows you to take advantage of all kinds of perks and deals, and you'll save money on every order. You can customize your membership to get shipments when it suits you. That flexibility proves that this is not a Coffee of the Month club that sends you stuff whether you need it or not. What you gotta do is type sparkplug.coffee/HYES into your browser. Putting our HYES promo code in the right place is how you'll get a one-time 20% discount. Listen to a podcast, save some bucks. Or since this is a period movie about the English, save some pounds. All right, friends, you can stop dusting another man's trophies while you pine for your coworker. The podcast is about to begin. Bev, please cue us in.
And action. Have you ever seen
The Remains of the Day? Hi, one and all, and thank you for tuning in to episode number 548 of the Classic Movies podcast that drops every Monday and every other Friday, and we call it Have You Ever Seen? Take note, we spoil. I'm the man whose father recently went and died on him and didn't openly cry about it. Well, I didn't. I can't speak for him. Although at least I wasn't aiding Nazi appeasement while my pops was fading away. Ryan Ellis. And here's the lady who's unable to be of assistance in this matter. My wife, Bev.
That's me.
I love that scene. I forgot that. I haven't seen this movie in quite a long time. When Stevens keeps on saying to that stuffy dude who's trying to make him look stupid, why should this guy get the vote? He doesn't know anything. Stevens doesn't know anything, but rather than saying, I don't know, I'm unable to be of assistance to you in this matter. That's hard to say, by the way. There's some edits there. And if you can't tell already, you probably can in my voice, and you will soon in Bev's. We're battling COVID now, actually. It was a cold for Bev for, 7 or 8 years there.
Yeah, it went on and on.
And now it's COVID. We both have it, and we're struggling. We'll see if we can get through this without sounding too terrible.
What a week we're having.
Yeah, Pops was gone a few days ago, and then COVID was, 2 days later for you, and a few days after that for me. All right, the coming attractions trivia for this week's picture, The Remains of the Day. I know I've mentioned this in our podcast once or twice before, but it applies now that we're finally talking about this movie. So the question is, a real-life butler, who actually worked for many years in Buckingham Palace, had simple advice for Anthony Hopkins on how best to play a butler. What was it?
You tell me, babe. I forgot to look this up.
I think I found this in the trivia on IMDb, and I saw this many years ago. I always love this. Well, it's sad, but when you're in the room, it should be even more empty.
Oh, that's
sad.
It's just such an immaculate definition, but yes, heartbreaking.
Okay, the repression of the day. Really, the remains of the day. They address it a little bit. You read the book. You'll tell us about this later, I'm sure. But Repression, the movie, was released by Columbia Pictures 30 years ago on November 19th, 1993. It cost about $15 million to make, so its $23 million haul means this splendid motion picture was not really a success. But wife of mine, this movie has been around for 3 decades, so perhaps it would be handy if you would remind us all about the plot. So please give him the skinny on Remains of the Day.
Anthony Hopkins is Mr. Stevens, the butler at Darlington Hall, a magnificent old English estate that has recently been sold. Encouraged by his new American boss, Stevens takes a road trip with the implicit goal of reconnecting with the hall's former housekeeper, Emma Thompson's Miss Kenton. As Stevens gets farther away from Darlington, he reflects on his years of service to Lord Darlington during a tumultuous time in history, the impact his work had, and the sacrifices he made in service to his profession. A life that, he concludes, was wasted.
And of course, most of the movie is set back in the past, in the days of World War II.
Yeah, it's all told through memory.
We do see a fair amount of the modern day scenes in 58, I think is what it says on Wikipedia. 1958. Well, yeah, most of the movie is in the 30s and into the 40s, I guess, right? Or mostly the 30s, actually, not the 40s.
Yeah, 30s.
Or, in a nutshell, stiff upper everything.
I wrote my own nutshell. There now. Stiff upper lip. So we were on the same wavelength.
We were. Keep calm and carry on serving other people. I asked this question now, after the nutshell, because it does apply to the stiff upper everything. Pip pip cheerio. Would Stevens allow himself to think about Kenton romantically, even when he's alone? Is this the kind of guy who's so repressed that even when he can sit and think about whatever he wants to, I'm gay, I like tacos, never told anybody, I'm in love with the housekeeper, I hate when my feet have socks on them, whatever he might think, do you think he allows himself to think about her even then?
Well, I know the answer because it's pretty explicit in the book. I'm probably going to refer to the book more than I even normally would in a podcast where I read the book the movie's based on.
And that was recent you read it.
It was recently I read it. It's a beautiful classic novel, but also this movie is remarkably loyal to the book, so I feel like it's fair to assume that if it's in the book, it's probably meant to be expressed by Hopkins. But actually, I want to know your guess. Based on like the movie that you saw and Hopkins' performance, what do you think the answer to that question is?
I think the answer is, yeah, he's in love with this woman, but the only way he can express that is not even passive aggression. Well, sometimes that happens, I guess. Passive aggressiveness, I guess is the proper phrase there. I wouldn't say he ever has a moment where he truly gives away the, my heart is breaking, when she tells him that she's engaged, for one thing. He plays that like he plays everything else, but I bet if you looked really closely, maybe some big screen, we didn't see it on the big screen, obviously it was here in our house, maybe there's a twitch in his eyebrow that says everything. Like that line in Watchmen where Ozymandias says, I know you, John, I think his name's John, what's his name, the blue guy, Dr. Manhattan. I know you so well that I can see when your eyes flutter a certain way that's huge emotion that you otherwise never seem to give off. Stevens is like that. I didn't really notice him have any kind of expression when Kenton tells him that, but you can tell his heart is breaking. Yes, I do think that he allows himself to think about her, but I bet even then he censors himself. He's not, to not be too crass about this, going into his pants, I don't think.
Yeah. He's not indulging himself.
He's probably never had sex and probably doesn't let himself think about sex with her or anybody else.
Yeah. The book is written from first-person point of view of his, almost like you're reading a diary, even though it's not a diary.
Kazuo Ishiguro, is that how you say that? Ishiguro?
I've heard it pronounced, honestly, dozens of times while researching this movie. Every person has a different way of pronouncing it. Just have at it, say it however you want.
Kazish.
Kazuo Ishiguro is the...
Ishiguro, okay.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, I guess, the Japanese way of pronouncing it, but... He moved to England when he was 6. He's an Englishman. I'm just not going to worry myself too much about it because apparently literally nobody else worries about how to pronounce his name. In this beautiful novel in which he is an unreliable narrator and you catch him catching himself in lies. A great example is he never really seems to personally have any problems with firing the Jewish maids until a year later when everybody has decided it was the wrong thing to do and suddenly it was how he always felt. Probably something like a lot of people have experienced.
But in the movie, he pushes back a little bit.
I guess I mean in the disagreement that he has with Miss Kenton. In his description of the disagreement he has with her, he's just like, well, what's her problem? I'm just doing what Lord Darlington asked me to. It's not my place to think about it.
Okay, well, how about this then? So she says she's going to quit if he makes her fire these two.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't change his mind, and she doesn't quit. I love that she admits, I'm a coward, although, are you really being a coward? Because if either one of them quit, he finds somebody else that'll probably, well, maybe you have to find multiple people. Maybe everybody has morals, but eventually he's going to find a butler and a housekeeper that will do whatever he wants to do. And this guy is not somebody that says, yes, the Nazis are awesome. Maybe
You're talking about Darlington now.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's misguided. He's an amateur, as Lewis says in that dinner scene.
He's a bit of a fool.
But he's not a bad person. Oh, well, maybe he's a little bit bad, but he's not a terrible person. He's not a Nazi lover.
He's like a true personification of the banality of evil.
But if Thompson...
His intentions start off good.
I said Thompson. And I meant to say Hopkins, well, Stevens. If Stevens pushes back and then says, well, you better fire me if you're going to fire them, and she would do the same, I don't think anything really comes of that. I love when people have morals in modern day, of course. Everybody has the morals, and they're always right about everything they think. I respect the people that stayed in the White House, at least some of the time, with Trump, because they thought, a lot of them did anyway, especially the military people, that they were doing a good thing by preventing worse things from happening. You could argue the same thing's going on here.
But that's not what Stevens is doing. Stevens isn't sticking around to prevent more bad things from happening. Miss Kenton isn't sticking around to prevent more bad things from happening.
They have a good gig and know it and love it.
Well, they have a gig. One of the things that isn't clear in the movie, but they talk about a lot in the book, is how this is an end of an era.
Yeah.
And to have an esteemed position in a home like this, especially if you're the housekeeper, she's the head housekeeper. She runs the female staff. She's almost as powerful. She would be like she is his right-hand man. They show that in the film. A job like that doesn't come around very often.
Right.
And she is a precarious life. She doesn't have a lot of family. This is before she has marriage options presented to her, which wind up being not great options in the end anyway, because she's not happy in her marriage in the end.
Yeah, she's Mrs. Ben more than she's Miss Kenton in the timeline, except most of the story we see, she's Miss Kenton.
Yeah.
We just watched a few hours ago one of the Simpsons episodes. We're rewatching the show just as something to get through 22 minutes of a day. We've seen the show so many times. But we saw the Prank Monkey one, which is the one where Homer throws pudding into Lenny's eye.
Ow, my eye. I'm not supposed to get pudding in one of my favorites.
There's some great lines in that. But at the end, one of the big pranks that Burns wants Homer to do, and Homer finally puts his foot down and doesn't do it, is throwing fish guts on a Christmas Day parade. Burns does it himself. He wears the Santa suit, and he does it, and Homer doesn't get the $1 million that Burns offers him. So yes, he and Lisa... What did you say? Lisa's
a pill in that episode. Of course she's right, but... He offers him $1 million to throw fish guts on the crowd, and Homer Simpson has too much dignity to do it, turns down $1 million, and then the crowd gets covered in fish guts anyway, and Homer doesn't get $1 million. What is the moral of this episode? I guess you could argue that episode of The Simpsons is a great analogy for if Miss Kenton had quit, if Mr. Stevens had quit, would it have changed Lord Darlington's opinion or his behavior? No. When he fires those two young women and he knows that their lives are most definitely in danger, if they don't have a job, then they don't have a place in England, then they may be deported back to Germany, or I can't remember if they came straight from Germany or from somewhere like Poland.
Austria or something.
Yeah, where they would have been in danger. Their lives were in danger without those positions to secure their place in England, and he knew that. And I wonder, when he makes that decision, Lord Darlington, does he consider their lives disposable because they're Jewish?
Yes.
Or because they're the help?
Both.
Both, sure.
And that's why I say that
but I think he would consider the butler and the head housekeeper, they're replaceable. I don't think he would think twice.
They're more valuable to him, but they're still not irreplaceable.
Which is all kind of serving to the theme, because I think the audience understands this too. She says, I'm a coward. Stevens is a bigger coward than her because he can't even admit to himself that it's a problem, that there's a moral quandary at play here. He's too much of a coward to even form his own opinions about the world. It's something that he completely defers to his employer, and he considers that the proper and dignified way to carry on in the world. Doesn't realize till it's far too late that he's dead wrong. He's committed to subsume his entire personality to the role, and so he defers the task of making any of those big moral decisions to his boss. When everything you do is subject to protocol, the way his life is, then you're not responsible for any of the decisions.
A lot of wives back in this era and into the 50s, in any part of the world, but especially in the Western world, would have the same opinion about their husbands. What's he voting for? I better vote for that same candidate.
Well, you know what I thought was an even better comparison would be soldiers. Yeah. Or clergymen. Imagine being a priest in the Catholic Church over the last 50, 70 years, learning about what has happened and understanding that you've deferred all of your moral clarity
people that don't deserve
to an organization that is deeply corrupt and maybe stupid and foolish and evil. If you're a priest, if you're a member of the clergy, if you're devoted to the church, you devote your life to the church, then you have to defer all of your moral decisions to this organization that you probably believe in at one point in your life and are grateful that somebody else is taking charge of those decisions for you. And then as you get older, you either have to be really good at compartmentalizing or you have to accept that it may have been a mistake. And it's a pill that Mr. Stevens does swallow. You ask, when does he indulge in the actual truth that he is in love with Miss Kenton? In the book, it isn't until the very end when they're sitting on the pier and she says, I can't come be the housekeeper for you. Even though my marriage has fallen apart, my life is here with my family because my daughter's pregnant.
Yeah, granddaughter.
And her daughter's pregnant.
Sorry, there will be a granddaughter.
There will be a grandchild.
She's excited about that, wants to be there. And also, this is a job interview, ironically enough. I thought that would be the nutshell at one point, job interview, and I couldn't figure out where to go with it.
Yeah,
so.
And that moment in the novel, he says, I had to admit to myself that my heart broke a little. And that's about as far of an insight that we get that he ever has romantic inclinations towards her. I think that's also the scene in the book and the movie where she admits to him, I once saw myself being married to you.
The key scene in the movie is when he's got the romance novel during his downtime and she catches him reading that. And she wants to see what it is. She has to pry his hands off of the book, just like she had to pry, was it him? He had to pry his father's hands off of the, whatever, was some kind of card or something when he was really sick. It's just a romance novel. And he makes the excuse, I need to learn how to speak better by reading these books. No, he just wants to be in a fantasy. And there you go. He's got a bit of an escape when it comes to romance. So I guess he thinks about sex and romance at least sometimes.
It's romance, though. It's not, because she's like, will I be scandalized? And she's like, this isn't scandalous at all. It's not a harlequin. It's companionship that he's fantasizing about.
But in that scene, I think they talk about this in the commentary. I believe that Thompson sits down with Merchant and Ivory. So we haven't said that. James Ivory directed this. Ismail Merchant produced it. And Ruth Prowler Jabvala wrote it. That team that did so many movies together.
And famously, Harold Pinter did the first pass of the script. He was uncredited because he said enough changes were made, but the entire production team admitted that they borrowed from his script quite heavily. Okay. Yeah.
I think the commentary talks, though, about how in that scene, the camera, as I recall, maybe there's cuts, but for the most part it stays to her right and his left, but behind her a little bit. And I feel like I heard somebody say this at one point, that his right hand is millimeters away from her hair. And if he just let himself go and touch her hair, then that would maybe be the beginning of the romance. But he doesn't quite do it. And it's such an intense scene. They don't kiss, but this movie was nominated for the AFI's Top 100 Passions for the entire movie. But that scene alone, it fits that, because this is unrequited something going on there. And in that case, more from him than even from her.
Can you think of another movie, particularly a movie that could be categorized as a romance, that offers this much tension and this much build-up
and never releases it?
Never catharsis. Yeah. You never see that moment where he lets it go, where he feels an emotion. That tension is building up and building up. And then in the end, what you get, actually, that beautiful scene that's not in the novel, where they capture the pigeon and they release it.
He and Lewis, yeah.
Yeah, and they release the pigeon. The pigeon is free, but they remain in the house. And beautiful cinematic metaphor for what's happened to him and what his future is going to look like.
I'm not sure that these two touch each other in the entire movie, but their last time together, when he puts her on the train and she pulls away, her hand pulls away from his, and the look on his face is, oh God, she's leaving. So that's why when I asked that question about does he even think about this woman, let himself think about this woman when he's in his downtime, I didn't think so when I wrote the question, but now I do because of that alone. And Hopkins never really truly gives away what he's thinking, except in a lot of ways that does. The whole hands departing from each other. That's the key shot in the entire film.
Yeah, and the build-up to that is this road trip that he's taking where he is
pretending he's not a butler, and not a butler for Darlington, which of course Darlington's now dead, but he was the butler for Darlington for all those years.
And he was disgraced. He was the butler for this man. He deferred all of his morality and decisions to him. And
he was a Nazi appeaser, and that's going to taint his name forever.
Yeah. Lord Darlington, as far as I can tell, he's an idle bachelor, fancies himself an expert in foreign affairs, passionately opposed to the harsh treatment of the Germans following World War I, so he made it his mission to use his influence, albeit an influence based strictly on his wealth and status, to argue for the loosening of the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Lord Darlington did have good intentions, and I think that in a respect he's correct. Lots of historians believe that the seeds of World War II were planted in the Treaty of Versailles, but there's a point where Darlington, committed to his position, becomes a Nazi appeaser, plants himself firmly on the wrongest side of history in history, and that failure takes down the whole house, Stevens included.
Where is Stevens supposed to have been between Darlington going insane and dying and what have you?
He stays in the house. He's always there. Darlington dies, and the butler and the staff come with the house. He's lost a lot of staff. He talks about it in the beginning. And
who pays him?
This estate pays him.
Pays them, I should say.
Somebody has to take care of the house. I mean, it is true of any of those old houses. You and I cannot buy a house like that and just live in it. It would fall into disrepair very quickly.
This is how I find out? You tell me?
Yeah. If we ever bought a big old stately mansion like that in the English countryside, I'm sorry, Ryan, but we would have to have a staff. You would have to have a butler.
Fix those patio stones.
Yeah. Yes. So, yeah, he never leaves the house. I think he spent most of his career there. I can't remember exactly, but I think he began his career as like an under butler there.
He's the Cal Ripken of butlers. Never leaves one team. Is there every single day.
Well, he grows up, his father's a butler, so presumably he was just born into the profession and probably started as soon as he was physically able to work as a child, started doing something.
We don't get a lot of first names. I don't remember what Kenton's... Is it Susan?
Sarah, but they call her Sally. But I think in the book, neither of them have first names.
Okay.
It's definitely Mr. Stevens does not have a first name in the book, but he's listed as James Stevens on IMDb.
Because his dad calls him Jim at one point when he's in bed, right before he dies. He says something, Jim something. And then we know from the conversation, one of the many debates, arguments early on between Stevens and Kenton, that she wants to call him William, but he should be called Mr. Stevens, even though that's your name. But anyway, that's why we know he's William, the dad. Charlie, the head footman, Ben Chaplin, in his debut, by the way, his first ever movie. So Charles, William, and James, very common British names, and all names of, kings. I don't know, many kings, right? Not just one or two, but many kings. So that's probably a deliberate choice by, well, you're saying the filmmakers, not so much the novelist. Another name I see, by the way, George, second footman, so another very common name, especially for kings in England. Okay, let's go back and do all the numbers. We haven't done that for all this time. Rotten Tomatoes, very good. 96% of people like this movie on that site. 8.5 out of 10 is the average. There are 47 reviews on the site, and 89% of audiences. This is the second best percentage on Rotten Tomatoes for Merchant Ivory, the team. A Room with a View is at 100%. That's a movie I did not like. I gotta watch that one again. If everybody thinks it's good, I gotta watch it again. Howard's End, which I did see a second time, liked it a little bit more the second time, still not a huge fan, is at 94%. But there are more splats for Merchant Ivory as a team on Rotten Tomatoes than I expected, about 10 of them, including things like the Golden Bowl. The film was 66th at the 1993 US box office, although it was 65th worldwide. Jurassic Park was number 1, we covered that. Mrs. Doubtfire was number 2, we covered that. I covered that back on Labor Day. The Fugitive was number 3, we covered that back in the summer. Sleepless in Seattle was number 5, we covered that back in, I think, June. And Schindler's List, which was on the AFI's Top 100 list, was number 9, so we've covered a lot of the top 10. The film was nominated for 8 Oscars, but didn't win any of them. Best Picture, James Ivory was up for Best Director, Anthony Hopkins for Best Actor, Emma Thompson for Best Actress. He'd won in 91 and she'd won in 92, so they didn't need to win again, even though they're both very good in this.
And she was also nominated for Supporting Actress this same year.
And that hasn't happened that often, but it was a lot of times around then. And in the very same year, another woman was in the same boat, and it was Holly Hunter. She won for The Piano, against Thompson, obviously, and she was nominated for The Firm.
Oh, wow.
And Pacino the previous year for Scent of a Woman, where he won for Best Actor. And supporting for Glengarry Glen Ross. So that hasn't happened that many times in history, but there's 3 people in 2 years. Anyway, where was I? Ruth Power Jabvala was nominated for the adapted screenplay. She won twice before this, A Room with a View and Howard's End. The sets were nominated, the costumes were nominated, and the music score was nominated too. Schindler's List and The Piano won most of those categories. Of course, Best Actor was Tom Hanks. I'll be talking about him on Friday. And I already said that the film was nominated for the AFI's Top 100 Passions. All right, well, you must have opening thoughts. Way past
We're
that.
like halfway through the podcast.
This happened a lot lately where the opening thoughts come halfway in.
It's impossible not to get into it. This is such a great, meaty film to talk about.
Well, quickly, I'll say, I've said this a few times lately, that's what the Coming Attractions trivia or opinion questions for. It isn't to stump you or the audience. It's more about stimulating a conversation. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that goes into a 10 or 15-minute thing.
And that's a great question, right? I like this film a lot. The screenplay's immaculate performances are out of this world. I'm a somewhat new fan of Ishiguro. This is the 3rd book of his I've read. I suspect I'm probably eventually going to go through his entire catalog. He is an incredible writer. He's been knighted. He's considered one of the greatest living English writers. I didn't love this book, though, as much as I've loved other books. It's considered his masterpiece. And I'm disappointed to say that the film didn't get under my skin the way I was hoping that it would. But I think it just says more about me. I am a Miss Kenton. I don't think I'm a particularly repressed person, but I bet that this film resonates with a lot of people in a lot of circumstances that don't look anything like Mr. Stevens. And I'm actually really interested in hearing your take.
I think everybody in this movie is repressed. When I call it repression in the movie, even Lewis, he's the most open and honest person, I think, in general in this movie. The Frenchman is, I guess, too, because all he worries about is his feet. And hey, when your feet hurt, that's not cool. It's his country that's going to get messed with. That I think I read somewhere recently. Maybe it's in the trivia for this, but I know I read this somewhere recently. I'm not sure I ever heard this before, though. One of the reasons why France capitulated to Germany, and they've always been called cowards by Americans, which is so dumb, it's never as simple as that anyway, is because they were told by Hitler, we're not going to invade you. Our issue is with other people, but not you. And then he did it anyway. Mm. Well, the scene with that guy who's worried about his feet all the time, he's not paying attention to what's being said in there because he's got to go off to the room and have his feet taken care of. Again, not unimportant, but not more important than this conference, why you're there in the first place.
Or more important that the doctor is being taken away from his dying father
to service
this guy's blistered feet. And it's not this man's fault. He doesn't know there's a man dying
Yeah.
upstairs.
But he wouldn't care either, I don't think.
You're probably right.
And he's also missing when the woman, the representative from Germany, interesting it would be a woman, by the way, in the 30s, you'd think it would be a guy. People can be upset about me saying that, but that's true. Almost 100 years ago.
I know, you think it would be a politician, not just a bunch of rich assholes sitting around in a
Also true.
borderline castle tut-tutting about
But
what
anyway-
they're going to do about this situation.
But what's his name again? French dude. Dupont Divry or Divry? There's no O in there, but it looks like Divry, but I don't know. Lewis, Christopher Reeve's character, is far more in tune with what's going on. He tries more than once to talk to Dupont, who gets blown off. My feet hurt. You can't talk while the butler is fixing your feet? The movie's implying that this French guy, you could say French in general, but this French guy is not taking this seriously. Lewis is. And then when Lewis steps up, when everyone else says, oh yes, Germany should be allowed to be themselves again. And if it weren't for Hitler and that mentality, I would agree with that as well. When Darlington says to, I think it's his friends, not the big conference, when you've beaten somebody in World War I, you don't keep your foot in their neck. That should be the end of it. Okay,
and
I
if
agree.
that decision had been made in 1919, I think the Treaty of Versailles was... 1918.
War ended in 1918 anyway, yeah.
Anyway, when the Treaty of Versailles was signed, if that decision had been made then perhaps history would have played out very differently. But Lewis is correct when he says, this is a mistake now. Hitler's Germany is not the same Germany, and we can't let them have military powers. We can't appease them. I can't remember exactly how it went down. It's funny, this movie is a lot of people trying to make decisions, but very few of them have a lot of power. They have influence
Because of their money.
because of their money, but not direct influence. Of course, we know that at some point the prime minister himself and the German...
Chancellor.
Chancellor.
No, it's not him. It's his representatives of his.
Yeah, they get together at Darlington Hall.
Well, wouldn't that be Hitler anyway at this point? Yeah.
It wasn't, though. It was...
No, but it would be Hitler who's in charge of the country, and he wasn't there. It was a representative. But it's supposed to be Neville Chamberlain, I believe. I don't think they say his name, but they say the prime minister.
They say the prime minister,
And that
yeah.
was Neville Chamberlain. Mm-hmm. And Chamberlain was an appeaser as well. Mm-hmm. Do you think that they're racist against the Jews?
Obviously...
I don't mean the Germans. I mean the people in
No,
England.
like Lord Darlington?
Yeah.
It was pretty well documented that anti-Semitism was rampant all over Europe at the time, and there were a lot of people
Still
that
is.
really... Well, yeah, no kidding. There were a lot of people that were like, what's the big deal? It just wasn't worth fighting over to save the Jews of Germany or the Jews of Poland, etc. I feel like when it comes to people like Lord Darlington and this ilk, and I think it's illustrated in the scene where they're asking Stevens his opinions of foreign affairs, and he can't answer any of their questions. You did it, the impression... that
where is it
I
again?
cannot assist you in this matter.
Oh, what exactly means I can find it? Where did I put that? I'm unable to be of assistance in this matter.
Right. They are in their ivory tower and they look down on everybody, and I think that they see much of humanity as like pieces on a chessboard. Probably don't care for Jewish people, but also don't care for coal workers or you name it. Not to say it's not racist to throw them under the bus and let Germany have their way with them and turn them into scapegoats and commit the Holocaust. It's racism, but it's also, I think, carelessness and arrogance and removal from the rest of the world. They live in these castles. They're protected from everything, and they may be able to answer those very meticulous questions about foreign affairs, but when he's on his road trip later in his life and he's just talking to the folks in the pub, they're not stupid. They're actually pretty well informed, and they're certainly opinionated. And it's a kind of eye-opening thing for him to see that it's not just the Lord Darlingtons of the world that have opinions and everybody else
Or
is
should
a
have
cog in the
opinion.
wheel. Or should have an
Because
opinion.
Darlington's friend in that scene where he's making Stevens look stupid says when Stevens leaves the room something about how, yes, these people get a vote. That's what people have brought up lots of times about when America was created. That the founding fathers didn't really intend for everybody in the country to have a vote. It was more about we get a vote.
Yeah,
Of course, women weren't a part
landowners,
of it. Black people
land-owning
weren't.
white men.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know where things will be on the 13th when we release this podcast. But of course, you're hearing about anti-Semitism because of what's going on in Gaza. And Islamophobia has been an issue since at least 9/11. You know what I think? It's not as simple as Islamophobia or anti-Semitism. I think what it is, it's the Christian Western world. Not just America. England, a lot of that too. France, all the other countries. It isn't just Jews are the problem or Palestinians are the problem. It's non-white people and it's non-Christians. And really, you can bring it down to non-Christians or even people that just lean that way like we do. We're not Christians, but we were raised in that kind of
Yeah,
society.
we're culturally Christian. Neither of us practice Christianity, but we were raised culturally Christian.
So, you know what I'm saying here? It's so
Yeah,
easy to
no,
say
I
Islamophobia is the
agree.
biggest problem in the world, or racism is in general against black people.
Christofascism or just Christian nationalism. It's like this grand form of tribalism.
The Nazis weren't just trying to kill the Jews. They were going to kill, if they could, black people, gay people,
Oh, and
everybody.
never would have stopped.
Anybody who wasn't.
They were
like me and you.
killing gay people and black people and the Roma people.
But it would have been even more, is what I'm saying. It would have been more of an issue if they could have kept going. I was surprised how much this movie was this political because I haven't seen it in a long time. I keep saying that lately about movies we're watching, but that's one of the fun things about The String lately because I would say probably half the movies we've seen a given year you've never seen before. And rarely do we see a movie I haven't seen before. But lately, especially, it's been that I haven't seen it in so long, I didn't remember what happened. I remembered the basic thrust of this, but I didn't remember some of the political stuff at all. I don't know why I didn't pick up on that the first time I saw the movie, because I liked this movie from the start. I've never been the biggest Merchant Ivory guy. I didn't like Howard's End when I first saw it. Didn't like A Room with a View very much. Just felt like this, oh, you've got that room. We should have that room. Oh, who gets that room? Who cares? Stupid rich idiots.
Okay. What makes you love this movie?
I don't know, because I didn't really understand the politics of it when I saw it in the
the
90s.
movie's not really about the politics. The movie,
Oh, it often is.
the movie is about
Well, I love that part.
repression. Yeah. It's about the definition of dignity. It is about, according to Ishiguro in an interview that I saw, he said, we're all butlers, in a way. We are all Stevens, and we all have to work somewhere. We're cogs in the wheel of the machine, and we don't really have control over where the benefit of our work goes.
Sometimes you have to sell out to your employer.
Listen, you and I both work in broadcasting. It's not that I'm not proud of my job. It's not that I have any moral quandaries
I'm
about
often
it.
ashamed.
You work in news. You certainly have opinions about it.
I've yelled at the screen plenty of times.
Right, but your work, your labor, goes towards creating this thing.
I'm putting it to air,
that
and I'm hating what
troubles
I'm
you.
doing.
So what do you think it is about this film that resonates with you? Forget the politics.
It was probably the performances, because these are two great actors, and I don't know what I'd seen of them. I probably saw this in 95, 96. I didn't see it on the big screen, I don't think, anyway. So I probably saw it on videotape in the mid-90s when I was 23 or 24.
What's a moment that resonates with you? I'm asking, I'm pressing you because I feel like you're repressed. Like, compared to me, you struggle more than me to get a hold of any emotions that aren't anger. I think this is probably most men of your generation. I hope I'm not crossing a line by saying this. I think you come by naturally, your whole family. Your mom is a little bit like this too. She's not the most emotive person, even though she is a woman and you're a man. It's not just the patriarchy, but it is also the patriarchy that your emotions are repressed. Part of the reason I don't relate to this movie that directly is because I'm a woman, so I don't suffer the same forces that Stevens suffers.
That's probably fair to say. Also, I wasn't getting any in the mid-90s. And this guy probably never has.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what I thought. I don't think it is what I thought.
No, but loneliness is huge in this movie. He is painfully, distressingly, hopelessly lonely.
Last week's movie was Happiness. Same problem.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I don't know. I just know I like the movie. I love the way it was made. It's such a classy movie, which was true about their other films, the Merchant Ivory team, granted. But I will give A Room with a View another chance. And I did give Howard's End a second chance and thought it was at least better. The great scene in that movie that I remember for sure is when Hopkins is with, I think, Vanessa Redgrave, who's older and dying. And of course, Hopkins is a lot older than Thompson. I think he's 22 years older than she is. But in both movies, he ends up romantically in one way or another involved with her, wants her in this movie. And she does want him, I guess, too. And in that one, I think they get married. I forget exactly now. But anyway, he starts to cry, and they're sitting on the lawn or something, and he puts his hand up to block, like, you can't see me. You can't see the tears coming out of my eyes about whatever it was. I forget what it... I love the scene. I forget the context. I just remember that exact moment. We talked about my dad. I haven't cried yet. I know I will at some point. I watched the end of Field of Dreams. I think it was that night or the night after.
Oh,
I thought
really?
that
You were
would
like
just
trying
kill
to
it.
make the tears come?
Chris and I said when we covered that movie and Scoring at the Movies that when our father dies, maybe even the mother, but when our father dies, that movie's going to just mess us right up. And I thought, well, let's find out. I finally could find, and it didn't happen. I thought it would. I will eventually have a moment. I still get emotional about my cousin killing himself. What was that, 2.5 years ago? That's a little different, good, because he was only in his mid-40s.
Tragedy.
And he committed suicide. My dad got 77 years and wasn't in good health for a long time. And finally, just that was it. Bad health, he died. Maybe that's part of it, too, the whole thing with the Stevenses, that you've got this, not bad relationship between William and James, but they're not close, I wouldn't say either. They're so formal with each other.
Very formal, yeah.
He at least calls him father when they're in the room together. I don't think he does when they're, no, he calls him Mr. Stevens when they're working. But when they're in the room, he calls him father, and you hear Jim. So it's a little bit more letting down their hair.
Oh, yeah, wild.
Crazy guys. So maybe I related to that, too. Although my dad and I had a better relationship in the last 20 or so years than we ever did when I was younger. One more point about this, actually. An old friend of mine, we're not close anymore, but I think his theory was that There's an American thing going on in a way here. Reeves got a pretty big part. They've got the cast in order of how they appear, but I think he would be third billed if it was by Hopkins, Thompson, then him. The American influence of him, but also you've got Mike Nichols and John Calley producing this. This isn't just Merchant and Ivory and English people. Well, she's not English. She's, I think, born in Germany, actually, but she's, I think, Indian descent. Maybe the old friend is right, that Calley and Nichols influence as well. Because I think Nichols maybe was going to direct this at one point, which is a strange choice.
Yeah, he was. It was Pinter writing and Nichols directing it originally. Yeah. So, like you say, it was this very quintessentially English film made by people who aren't necessarily English, but then who better than an outsider to see and present back to people what their country is actually like.
And Reeve is in it quite a lot. He's spaced out, obviously.
It's a very important part, and I agree with you. It's the contrast of the way that he operates compared to the way everyone else operates is important. The contrast between the English and the American way of doing things and the American way of running the household, because as he's there, you can see Stevens is just so far out of his element, does not know what to do with him, does not know how to make his employer happy anymore. Darlington was so beast to deal with, but he was just so specific and understood the protocol and behaved properly.
Lewis looks like, if they work together for a long time, will treat Stevens as much like a friend as you can when somebody's your employee.
Which is just completely throws him off balance. Yeah. There's a whole thing in the book about how his goal to become a new butler for his new American employer is to get better at banter. He has to figure out how to banter with him. They say the word over and over.
He talks a lot more in the present day scenes than he ever does in the whole rest of the movie. And the present day scenes are not that many. So his scenes with Thompson, obviously, he's going to talk to her. It's just the two of them having lunch, I guess it is, and then on the pier. But then even the scenes with Lewis, they talk a lot. And Lewis is the one that says, take the big, beautiful car, which I wonder, by the way, if it was a German car, if that was supposed to be a subtext there. Although Lewis is not pro-Germany in the earlier set scenes in this movie. But I think it's an English car, which makes more sense. But that is a giant, beautiful, big boat he's driving around. And Lewis insists he take it. I don't think Darlington would have done that.
And for all of Darlington's propriety, he's just as repressed, I think, as Stevens is. He is also obviously a very lonely man, a bachelor. Never see him with any family outside of his godson, and even that relationship seems to have a transactional element.
He thinks he needs to know the birds and the bees. Like you point out, Hugh Grant, that guy needs to be
You're telling me that guy doesn't... I can't say it.
He's never done it.
You're telling me that guy still needs to learn about the birds and the bees? Come on.
It wasn't laugh out loud, guffaw, hold your chest type laughter, but when Stevens talks to him in the garden about yes, the birds and the bees and the nature and the da-da-da. It's about as funny as this movie gets, because I don't know if Cardinal, so Hugh Grant's character, the godson, realizes what exactly is going on, but I think he does figure it out, and then he almost has fun with him. It's not mocking him like that other guy does in a later scene where it's, what do you know about this issue? I'm unable to be assistant in this matter, that whole thing. But there's an element as well of Cardinal, I think, playing with him a little bit, because you got this guy, and maybe Hopkins is too old to play that role because he is basically almost a senior citizen playing this. Not that he can't be an older man, but it would make a little.
He's got to play two ages 20 years apart, so you age him down, you age him up. You have to pick one or the other.
I guess so. Maybe he should have been about 40-ish.
And if you get Hopkins to be in your movie,
and he worked with these guys 4 different times in total, so he knew the Merchant Ivory guy as well, and Ruth Prowler, Jabala pretty well. And Thompson was part of the same movie, obviously, the year before. Almost the entire same team came back the very next year to make this. So Howard's End and then this back to back.
Even though, as I understand, part of how they keep their budget down is they cut out all perks for the cast and crew. Everybody flies economy, and they get meal vouchers. They don't have a nice crafty table, and all those perks that actors especially tend to enjoy are pretty stripped bare, so they can put every dollar on the screen. And apparently, Ishmael Merchant has a real touch for getting people to loan them their houses for filming locations.
Okay. He also, I believe I read, cooked for the crew.
Oh, wow. I love that.
And of course, he and Ivory were together for many years. When I first heard of Merchant Ivory, I thought it was just a name for a company. I didn't know it was the last name of 2 people. It's funny how often you hear about that.
Kind of like Lord and Miller or something.
Yeah, Jeopardy teaches that all the time. There's a category recently about
famous pairs.
Yeah, people maybe don't realize that Rolls and Royce are 2 different people, or Black and Decker were 2 different people. Well, same with Merchant and Ivory, and they were together for many years. Merchant died in 2005. Complications from surgery is what that was. So Ivory's been without his man for going on 20 years now. And Ruth died in 2013. She was with her man for, I think, something like 60 years. So he's the Jabvala. She's Ruth Prowler. Some kind of pulmonary problem, but she was quite old. It's not like it's some tragedy. And Ivory's now 95 and still alive. We covered a movie, the only time we've ever covered anything these 3 people ever made before today, was him writing Call Me By Your Name, which won him the Oscar, when was that, 5 years ago?
Wow.
Or 6 years ago now. Which, of course, is about a young gay man with an older bisexual man. I'm not sure if Ismail Merchant was supposed to be either one of those characters and Ivory was the other one, or if it just relates to the story because they were both gay. I don't know. But
I remember when we covered Call Me By Your Name, that's what inspired me to go back and finally see, is it Marcel? Maurice, yes, Maurice.
Or Morris.
Oh, yeah, they do call him Morris in the film. It's a Merchant Ivory film starring Hugh Grant about two young men who have a gay relationship in college, and one of them splits and marries a woman, and the other one grows up and comes out or lives a gay life. Very similar themes to Call Me By Your Name, kind of like a coming-of-age story for the homosexual men. Not as good as this film, but definitely worth watching. If you're into the Merchant Ivory stuff, I would highly recommend it.
Well, speaking of Hugh Grant, he's become such a funny character actor in recent years. He was a star back then. We know about the scandal, I guess, that happened not long after this, actually. The 9 months time frame, I believe, is when he was promoting that movie. And anyway, we've never covered him before, though, which surprised me.
Really?
Same with Emma Thompson. We'd never covered Emma Thompson before. And Hopkins
What?
was only once. You know what Hopkins one movie we covered because it was on the AFI list.
Of
and it's
course.
one of the great films of all time, Silence of the Lambs. But we never covered Thompson or Grant before. Ben Chaplin, not a huge name, but we never covered him before either. The only person I think in this entire list, well, Reeve, because I did Superman just a few months ago, though. So before that, we'd never covered Christopher Reeve. But the only other actor in this entire list that I wrote down of people we covered before in any way, and you didn't even do this, was Lena Headey. You didn't pick up who she was. She sounds the same, but looks quite different. She's so young in this movie, of course. But she was in Fighting With My Family, which Chris and I covered on Scoring at the Movie. She's the mother of the wrestling character in that, the Florence Pugh character. We know her from Game of Thrones, 300, all those kinds of things. But here she's this, what's her name again? Lizzie. She's the one that
The young,
Hopkins
pretty
doesn't want to
maid.
hire. And I think you even said, is it because, or maybe Kenton says it, or maybe you both said it, I don't know. Is it because she's hot? Oh, it is Kenton, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, they have like a whole back and forth, and she's like, "You're blushing. You're attracted to her."
That's why you don't want to hire her.
Yeah.
You talk about the headliners, too. Hopkins has won 2 Oscars now. He'd won before for Silence a couple years before this came out. She won the year before for Howard's End. Then she won for writing Sense and Sensibility. He won a couple years ago for The Father, so they both have 2 Oscars on their mantle. She's really funny, too. In that commentary track, I think they talk about how she was a stand-up comic, and I thought, I get it.
Oh, she's so funny.
I wouldn't say that often in her movies, though, does she get a chance to be that funny. I was also reading that Meryl Streep wanted this role, and it's one of the few times she was ever turned down for something. But why wouldn't you go authentic? And they probably thought, let's just get most of the same people, at least the headliners we just worked with a few months ago, to be in this movie. That makes sense together.
Yeah,
Reeve
you know
was,
they have chemistry together.
Reeve worked with them before, too. The Bostonians, I think it was. So he wasn't even new. And you said Grant worked with them before. James Fox, who does play Darlington, worked for 70-plus years. But this is his first movie that we've covered. He was in Sexy Beast, that really good movie from about 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago. Peter Vaughn, so the father, 60-plus years he worked. He's Meister Aemon in Game of Thrones. I believe he's the Meister at the Wall, isn't he?
He totally is, and that is crazy because in this movie, he so convincingly plays someone who could pass for like 90 years old. And to think that he was working again
25 years later,
25, 30 years later. He's so convincing that probably it can be mistaken for a forgettable performance, but this able-bodied man plays this feeble old man so believably.
Has to be humble, too, because his son is telling him you got to work dustpans and mops and condescendingly. I don't think Stevens is mean to be as condescending. Maybe he is. Condescending as he's being in that moment, but I know how to work a broom. But it's because he keeps screwing up. He's leaving out the dustpan on the staircase at one point. Pretty minor problem, but Stevens is outraged that his father did that. The whole thing about the Chinaman, they say that over and over again. The Chinaman's not the issue here, dude. Asian American, please. Asian Bretonian. What's the word I'm looking for that? Bretonian? Please. Anyway, so Kenton talks to Stevens about how his father left the Chinaman in the wrong place. And then the other one, the big one, is when he trips on the stones. Oh, no, sorry. I forgot about the nose running as well. That I think drips in
the sweat dripping, yeah.
Oh, it's sweat. I thought it was supposed to be snot, which I'm battling here, by the way. We've cut some of these nose blows out. We're getting through so far, I think. Anyway, yeah, so 4 things in this movie he does, and eventually he doesn't get fired because he does die on the job, basically, but he's not cutting it.
I love the presence of his father and the relationship that he has with his father. What's more dignified, allowing a man who wants to work to continue to work, to find roles for him that he can fulfill even though they may seem demeaning, but better than putting him out to pasture, which would probably kill him faster than the job is killing him.
Might be true.
Or is it dignified to give him some kind of retirement? I don't know what the perfect decision is here, and I think that as much as it can seem like Stevens is being condescending or cruel, it's still like a kindness that he's letting him stay there, that he's putting up with his little hissy fits about his new role, because he knows how important it is to him, and he knows how important it is to him because he learned by watching him. I learned by watching you, Dad. He's trying to emulate his father, and in the scene where his father is dying and he continues to serve the event, which is a very important event, he knows, and I think he's correct when he says, this is exactly what my father would have wanted.
I said this in a recent podcast, and I probably said it before that, though, too. There are times when your family does not come first, even in this situation.
Okay, but if you have to choose between being there when your father dies and a tea service going perfectly...
Which I wasn't.
Well, that wasn't our fault. He ended up dying very quickly. We were trying to arrange to be there when it happened.
At least we were there the day before.
Yeah, we managed to see him the day before. But he could have very well been there for his father, understanding he was going downhill and things were getting bad. If he was a heart surgeon, then yeah. But he's making sure dessert service goes off flawlessly.
Well, it's also when he finds out from Ben Chaplin's character, who whispers in his ear and says, whatever, I think he says, your father is dying. This is it. And then so he makes sure Darlington finishes what he's saying. He's standing up, sits back down, pushes his chair, and then he bolts. Mm-hmm. So Stevens does get to the room. Does he see his father? No, he's already...
He learns after.
He's already died. Yeah, I guess that does hit a little close down for me right now, because I wish I'd been there more than I was. But then you were sick, and I was around you.
There was a COVID
outbreak in the hospital where he was. I don't know. I'm the one that's always saying that I think it's so cliche to say family comes first, because sometimes it doesn't. This guy is obsessed with serving his master, and this is the most important thing his master, his Lord, has ever done.
And he does believe in his heart that a perfect tea service, that a perfect service will actually help change the events of the world. He does believe that he has his own small influence on the larger happenings of the world, and he's proud of the part that he played up until he realized he was working for the bad guy.
Yeah.
He's proud that he had an influence on these international affairs by presenting England with this great dignity.
His dad would have been too.
So
proud of him, proud of himself.
And he's right. His dad absolutely would have been proud of him. But I think we, the audience, and he himself in the evening of his life and the remains of the day, as he's considering this, he's like, it was a mistake. Part of the mistake is that he, as a human being, should have had permission to walk away from serving people food and drink, to grieve for his father, to feel his feelings, and be with his family or with his friends, or to just have a human experience that isn't fulfilling his work duties.
Which these guys could get their own damn tea. There's a good question for you.
Or there's a bunch of staff that can do it.
There are other people, Chaplin takes over for him.
Yeah, know what they're doing.
Yeah, Charlie is Chaplin. He takes over. Charlie, is that his name? Yeah, Ben Chaplin plays Charlie. I think the question is also, if you were to pipe up, and you're not allowed to, but if you were to pipe up as one of the service people and say, oh, there's an emergency with just a staff member, not even my dad, would they have the humanity to say, oh, please, go, do that. We can get our own tea, or this person can get it for me, or we don't have to have tea right this second. What do you think they would say?
The book comes back to this over and over again. Not this very scene, but the notion of what a butler's job is. As you say, the room should be more empty. And to explain to people in a party we have an emergency with the staff would be the opposite of that idea. Mm-hmm. And his consideration would be a massive failure.
Oh, no, he wouldn't do it. He would never do it.
No. Now, there's the story that his father tells at dinner about the butler who sees a tiger, very calmly informs his employer there's a tiger in the dining room, takes care of it by killing the tiger, cleaning it all up, and then informing his employer that the problem's taken care of. Dinner will go ahead as planned in the dining room. That is considered like an exemplary example of a British butler and what they do. They don't panic. They don't make a big fuss. They just take care of the problem. And in the book, they actually go on about this quite a bit. There are several butlers who are famous for completing feats like this, including Mr. Stevens Sr., who, as fable tells it, once served a dinner where one of the guests was this bigwig British general whose haphazard orders got the British army into this big mess that ended up with the death of William's son, Mr. Stevens' brother, who was a soldier in the war. You don't learn this in the movie, but Stevens has a brother who died in the war, It was widely considered the fault of this general, and when his father was asked to serve this general, he did it with such exemplary perfection that the general himself complimented his service and said he did a wonderful job. And everybody's clap, clap, clap. Oh my God, what a great butler. Can you believe that he could put his own personal feelings aside and be so good at his job? There's another famous butler that he talks about, and this comes up in the scene where they're quizzing Stevens about foreign affairs. There's a butler who considered it very important for himself to be very informed about everything that was going on in the world and current affairs, and was trotted out almost like a parlor trick. His employer would have people ask him all these questions, and he would always have a quick and informed answer about it. Now, he's not expected to opine about decisions that these big important people are making, but he considered part of his butler duties, or just a perk that he brought to the job, that he was incredibly informed on these matters. Stevens admits that he's not that kind of butler, but he wants to be in the annals of these great butlers, and when he serves the party while his father is dying upstairs, and he continues doing this immaculate service without any interruption, without letting any of the guests know what's happening upstairs, he does join the annals of these great butlers. That is the moment that he is going to be one of the stories that people would tell around a dinner table. Of course, they won't, because this culture doesn't really exist anymore.
No.
The culture has died, so there won't be anyone left to carry on his story. But part of his motive for carrying on is to prove to himself, to prove to the world that he did earn his position, he deserves it, and he is one of the great, most dignified butlers. Of course, dignity is something, it's a word that comes up over and over in the book and in the movie. He has a lot to say about it. His life revolves around being dignified as he sees it. He sees it in the beginning of his life as this level of professionalism and loyalty to his employer. But of course, as the film comes to a close, he admits that even he can't claim responsibility for his own mistakes, I think is how he words it. If a man can't claim responsibility for his mistakes, then who is he? He has failed in having dignity because he always misunderstood what made a person dignified.
So most of that you just said is in the book then? Because some of that's in the movie, I would say. But
They have the one story in the movie about the tiger, but in the book they discuss several great butlers, and it's understood that he's joined their ranks.
I bring up Whiplash yet again. In that scene with his family at dinner, Andrew and his father.
But Charlie Parker.
He wants to be something special and be talked about, even though Charlie Parker died broke and alone, and yet he's still a legend. But even beyond someone like that, even, I don't know, Wayne Gretzky or Muhammad Ali, these people, Michael Jordan, who've been put on a pedestal of greatness in their job, they undoubtedly neglected their family to do what they do for a living. They had to. How do you not?
And neglect themselves.
A lot of movie actors do.
Yeah, betray themselves and what would have made them a happy person.
Because these things matter. Family matters too, but you have to go to work right now. This matters. So this notion that Stevens had it wrong, but this is what mattered to him, and this is what he was qualified to do. He doesn't seem like the most intelligent person.
But he himself, in his old age, looking back, when he's considering the remains of
Hindsight's
the day,
always 20/20.
Okay, but he himself is saying, I made a mistake.
Yeah.
I was wrong. I have wasted my life. Ishiguro has said over and over when he talks about the book, this is a manual how to waste your life. Stevens has wasted his life.
What else was he going to do?
Have a family, have relationships.
Be poor? Not live in a giant
rich?
mansion?
He's not rich.
No, he lives in a giant mansion.
Okay, but he lives in like a monk's room.
That's true.
You know, he wears a uniform. Those are his clothes. He borrows a car to go on a trip to see England for the first time in his life. When he goes to see Miss Kenton, that's the farthest he's ever gone away from Darlington Hall. He says, oh, the world came to me, but his whole life was work. And he's not happy. So you could argue, well, this is the choice he's made, this is what he wants, but he's wrong for wanting it.
Okay.
And maybe Charlie Parker, you and I always have this argument whenever Whiplash comes up, maybe Charlie Parker wasted his life. He gave the world the gift of his music, and I'm sure that he was proud of it, but how did he die? Did he kill himself?
I think it was a drug overdose.
Or drug overdose. Clearly, you have a person who wasn't personally happy, no matter how much he thought that these things would be fulfilling and make him happy.
But we are still talking about him
He
now.
died a death of desperation. So what? I don't care if people talk about me 50 years after I die. If my life was miserable, I don't care what people say about me after I'm dead.
Stevens isn't miserable through most of this movie.
Isn't he?
This is what he wants to do.
Did we see the same movie?
It's what he wants to do.
Doesn't mean he's right to want to do it.
That's your opinion. That's what you feel
You
about it.
don't think he's miserable.
Not in the way I think of the word
You think
misery.
he's a happy person?
When I think about what people are going through in the world all the time, really, but especially right now in Gaza, we talked about that earlier. No
Okay,
comparison.
that's not a fair comparison, though.
Okay, somebody
Compare
who's-
him to Miss Kenton, a person who makes bad decisions too, but at least she makes her own decisions. She's not happy with their marriage.
and leaves it.
Leaves her job, leaves her marriage. Who between those two do you think has a more fulfilled life?
Probably her, but then she married a guy she didn't love, and she was being petty about it in the first place when she tells him, meaning Stevens, that she was proposed to. A lot of lesser movies would have said, in some more direct way, I'll marry him unless you say otherwise, because that's what she's implying. But all Stevens says is, oh, hope you have a pleasant evening. It's wonderful. I'm so glad for you, that kind of stuff. When, if we're reading the movie correctly, I think we are, he's dying inside.
So you think he's right that he should just die inside?
No, but that's a small part of his career is dealing with her, working with her, and feeling this way about her. I think for the most part, happy is not really the right thing. Not everybody dwells on being happy. What's the quote? I wrote it down. When he says on the road trip to somebody, because after he denies that he even knew the Lord, more than once he does that, he says
He denies his life works.
he was proud to have given my best years of service. That means something. It should be complicated. I like the movies that are complicated, like Happiness was last week. And I'm sure Her next week will be the same thing. Okay, we talked about the cast and the producers, the director and writer, all that already. So the movie's 239-1. We watched it on Netflix, although we do own the DVD. The cinematographer, Tony Pierce Roberts, a regular with Merchant Ivory in these days, but also shot horror films. Interesting contrast. The editor, Andrew Marcus, a regular with Merchant Ivory as well, but cut American Psycho and Hedwig and the Angry Inch. We've covered all those two movies. And the composer who was nominated for this, Richard Robbins, is a regular with Merchant Ivory, or was with Merchant Ivory, and he was nominated the year before for Howard's End. I guess we've already said the movie looks fantastic, the sets are great. They got a real location, obviously, for the exteriors and I guess the interiors. Maybe they built all those sets. If they did, that's a lot of sets.
They shot a lot of them in those old houses.
Good.
It's several houses that stand in for one Darlington
Okay.
Hall, but they had one house for the servants' quarters and another house.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, the movie's great to look at, and it's long, but it's not slow-paced. It's a deliberate pace. Intentionally deliberate. Do you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
As for what happens next, well, much like Allie in A Star is Born, Stevens will never love again. Although what he will do is work until he drops dead, I think. Mm-hmm. And it is nice to think that Lewis is more personable with Stevens than Darlington was. And Darlington wasn't a jerk to him, but this is a more human being to this other human being. They may not be friends, but Lewis sees him more as a person than the Lord ever did. That's what I think what happens next. This man's going to die, just like his dad did while working. And there's an element of him that, well, maybe not anymore, because I agree, he did say these things. This older part of him is saying, I wasted my life, but then he goes right back to being in service of somebody else.
Well, even in the most difficult life, there are moments of happiness, of satisfaction. It's easy to say that this is a man who's so satisfied by his work. He's a workaholic, obviously. But he takes so much satisfaction in a job well done, and he is accomplished at his profession. That's not nothing.
And he's working with a different person now as well, Lewis, in the 50s. It's a whole different ballgame.
Although it's so unlike what he was trained to do. At this point, he's an old man, senior citizen. He would normally be retiring at the age he's at that point in the book. But instead, he has to almost start afresh with a different way of operating a house, with a different way of relating to his employer, a whole new protocol from the one that he was brought up from a young boy to follow. And he has to fit into this new world. So it can seem, and maybe this is because we are Westerners, because we're going to relate far more to the American than we are to the Brits, that we go, well, this is obviously the better way of doing things, to have this convivial relationship between employer and
Doesn't
butler.
freak out when the toast is burnt. That happens sometimes. Darlington wouldn't have accepted
But I
that.
think that he would be more comfortable working in a house where that was absolutely unacceptable.
You're probably right about that. But his new boss, fine.
Yeah.
If it keeps happening, he's probably going to have a problem with that. But one time, okay, you're humans. It's all right. You made a mistake. All right, then last thoughts on The Remains of the Day.
Well, it's a beautiful film, something anyone would get a lot out of, even if it's not personally relatable, like it's not necessarily to me. And if you do love this film, I invite you to read the book. It's just so insightful and beautiful. And Ishiguro is a wonderful writer, but these performances and this screenplay, I think they did it beautiful justice.
Yeah, it's classy. The actors are great. Surprisingly political. Well, maybe not surprising, but I don't remember this movie having this much of a focus on Darlington helping the Nazis, which is what he's doing. And maybe he knows more than we think he does if he's going to say, these two Jewish girls, get the hell out of here. Of course, that gives the movie more depth than just Butler loves housekeeper but can't admit it. It's a complicated story. There's a lot more going on than just that. The main issue works very well, though, that love story. And him not being able to tell her that, or even admit to himself, outwardly at least. Well, I think I said that he does admit it in a way, but he still represses even when he's in his own thoughts.
Yes.
Whatever you can think, the most open thoughts you can ever have, the most awful thing a person could ever think, or a great thing, but you never tell anybody, that even that, he's pulling back.
Yeah.
What he really thinks of Miss Kenton, or Mrs. Ben now at this point. And it's a well-told story by Merchant, Ivory, and Jabvala, and Nichols, and Callie, and the actors, and the production team. The next time an episode goes up on this channel is going to be 4 days from now, and we'll be staying in the year 1993. Or at least I will, because my solo show on November 17th will be a film that starred an actor who competed with Anthony Hopkins in the Best Actor category at the Oscars that year, and Tom Hanks won that award for his work in Philadelphia. But in 7 days, when this fine young lady across from me is back on the mic, we'll be doing our fourth re-review of a motion picture we talked about 10 years ago. First, we recovered Inside Llewyn Davis, then it was 12 Years a Slave, and then The Wolf of Wall Street. The last time we'll be doing the thing where we post a proper full review of a film we covered during what we called the Now Playing Project back in the winter of 2013 and 2014 will be Spike Jonze's Her. The movie might be more timely now than it was even then. The coming attractions trivia for Her. What voice would you want to hear on your phone that would make you fall in love with that person or that AI?
All right, so for the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about Her. You already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. Is there a movie you'd like to hear us cover? Well, you can make a recommendation by leaving us a rating and a review. Or just leave us a rating and a review because you like us, and that helps people find us. We're both on Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis Ellis and Ryan is at MovieFiend51, or you can reach us by email. Have you ever seen podcast@gmail.com?
Twitix.
It's X. I'm still just not
I just keep
there.
calling that Twitix.
You can also find our podcast on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
I trust you'll have a pleasant evening. And bye-bye, Pops.
And cut.